Bonjour, hi, welcome back to another coffee talk. For those of you who are not familiar with another coffee talk, it's a series and a podcast I have where every Friday I sit down with a cup of coffee. I sip on it while I talk about different topics that have been on my mind for the past week. And this week is no exception. I recently went on a date and my date never showed up. It's a kind of situation that I thought only happened in movies, but I had a pretty big reality check. It happens in life as well. I don't wish that upon anyone because it made me feel all kinds of ways. And I didn't tell that story to anybody for quite a little bit of time because I felt almost ridiculous, stupid, ashamed, but most of all, humiliated. When I finally got around telling that story to people around me, more specifically my friends, and just like people asking me about my dating life, not that strangers come up to me and ask me about my dating life, but like acquaintances, and I don't know, I'm just known to have all these dating stories, which I'm not happy about, but it just happens to be that way. Anyway, now looking back at it, I'm able to process the situation a little bit better, and I'm not here to throw anybody under the bus. I'm not here to shame anybody, but I just wanted to talk about that situation in particular and how it made me feel and how I kind of processed it, or I'm still processing it. So here we go. To be completely transparent with you, at first I didn't quite know if I wanted to make this week's episode about that, because I feel like I'm always talking about dating and I'm always complaining and telling all these stories about dating. And even though I am a hopeless romantic, I feel like I'm growing more and more tired and exhausted of the whole dating scene. But at the same time, I can't help myself but to date. I'm a serial dater. I love dating. I love meeting new people. But then shit like that happens, and it makes me realize why I hate it so much. It's really a love-hate relationship that I have with just a dating world. And I tend to be a pretty optimistic person, and I have this belief that the right person will find me eventually, or vice versa. I will find the right person for me eventually. But having to go through all of that again and again makes me feel almost less and less optimistic about this whole thing, about the whole dating scene and about finding my person. But I feel like just talking about it, because this is the reality for many, many people, because every single time I talk about dating with friends, family, it all comes down to the same thing. We're all saying the same thing. We all encounter the same problems. And here I am once again talking about that. But I think what's interesting about this one situation in particular, as opposed to every other situation before, is really how it all made me feel, and all the emotions that resurfaced at that exact moment when it happened, and when I kind of understood that I was getting bailed on, pretty much. And that in itself was a pretty big introspection, and it made me kind of go back into time almost and realize where all these emotions came from and why they resurfaced at that moment. And as I mentioned, one of the biggest emotion that I felt at the time when I realized I was getting bailed on and when my date was not responding and didn't show up was humiliation. I've always been a very proud person, and I have a pretty big ego, and I'm a little bit stubborn, if you ask me. And that moment, it crushed me. Yes, I felt frustrated and I felt angry, but I also felt ashamed of myself, and I felt worthless. I felt like I was not even worth a text or a call saying, hey, you know what, I'm not going to show up. And I talked about this exact emotion, this exact feeling to somebody recently, and what they told me was so important, and I really needed to hear that. And what they said was, how people treat you is not a reflection of your worth or of who you are. It's a reflection of who they are and how they handle themselves and how respectful they are towards other people. And I do believe in that. I truly believe in that. But being faced with a situation like that, it's hard to put that in perspective, and it's hard to remind yourself of that because the feeling is so intense and the things just unfold themselves in a way where it makes you think like you're the problem, and it makes you feel like you're not worth it. You're not worth the shot. You're not even worth a text. You're not even worth a call. But in the end, now that this has happened like almost 2 weeks ago, I'm able to realize that it's not about me. Truly, it's not about me. It's about them not being able to respect their word and just not being respectful enough to, I don't know, it's not even a question of commitment. I was going to say commit, but it's not even about that. It's about respect. It's about just like respect. I've talked about this before, and it's something I, again, am currently working on, and I feel like I'm getting better at it because I'm able to put things in perspective now. But I used to put a lot of my self-worth into other people's hands, in the sense that whatever people would say I was, or whatever people would think I was kind of what I became, if that makes sense. So I had, not that I didn't have a sense of self, but I think that if people said I was funny, then I was funny. But if I found myself funny, that was not good enough. It was not like an actual proof that I was funny, for example. So the way that people would talk about me, or the way that people would behave around me, would, in my head, it would be a reflection of what I was. And I was basing my self-worth on other people's opinion. And the more I'm growing, the more I'm realizing that it's not always the case. And I think this is where the nuance needs to be made, is yes, the way that people treat you is not always a reflection of who you are and what you're worth. But on the other hand, it's like if you're being an asshole and just shamelessly living your life with a selfish attitude, obviously the way that people are going to treat you is going to reflect who you are, or it's going to be affected by the way that you behave around them. So I think it's all a question of balance, but I think it's also like in some cases and in some scenario, it really depends. But ultimately, I think that it really varies from one situation to another, and it's just important sometimes to put things into perspective and just realize that people behave a certain way because they have their own issues, because they have their own problems. And it's not always based upon your problems and your issues and your traumas and your perspective, if that makes sense. And what's funny is that because I do include myself in that, we live our lives as the main characters, right? Because my life is lived through my point of view, through my eyes, through my values, through my thoughts. But what I have to kind of remind myself is that when situations like this happen, and now I'm talking about this one particular situation, but it could be like at work, it could be with friends, it could be with family, it could just be like with strangers. It's not always about me. It's not always about the main character. Sometimes there are other factors that come into play that you don't realize are there because the narrative changes from one perspective to another, from one point of view to the other. And in that one particular situation, what happened was probably impacted mostly by the other person's life and the other person's issues and problematics and traumas and just like life in general. But I don't have access to that point of view. And so it's hard sometimes to make sense out of it because you don't have all the elements to justify one's behavior or to justify one's words. So sometimes it's good to just remind yourself of that you are maybe missing some information and you are maybe missing the bigger picture, because we all are. We're all biased by our own experiences and we're all biased by our own point of views and values and whatnot. But yeah, sometimes it's good to kind of remember that everyone is the main character of their own lives and people are pretty much just there, you know? And I think it's very humbling to kind of remember that and to live life knowing that, because, well, as I said, not everything is about you, and that's fine. And I'm not saying that your emotions or whatever you're going through or your point of view is invalid. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying that everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own movie happening in their lives. And similarly, I think it's important to remember that everyone comes into your life for different reasons. Some of them are there to stay for longer than others. Some of them just cross path with you once in a lifetime, and that's okay. And I used to kind of want to hold on to people, especially people that I would get along with, or especially people that I would kind of not project myself with, but I would see potential, not only romantically, but just good people in general that I would enjoy having conversations with, or I would enjoy their company. I would want to hold on to that because it felt so nice and genuine and satisfying and gratifying. But sometimes people are just there for a short period of time, and that's fine, because you just have to enjoy the moment. And it's something that I'm really struggling with, being present and being in the moment, because I tend to get in my head a lot, and I tend to kind of overthink a lot of things, and I want everything to just go perfectly and smoothly. But this is not what life is about. Life is a path. There's going to be bumps on the roads. There's going to be harder times, but there's also going to be easier times, and you just have to hold on to that. And I know it's hard, especially when you're in a little rough patch, that it's hard to remember that. It's hard to think about the bright side. It's hard to think about the moment where everything is going to be better, but it will get better. And in times like this, especially in that situation where my date didn't show up and I felt all these emotions, I kind of had to remind myself of that. And this is what helped me to handle the situation better and look at it as a way for me to grow, and look at it as a way for me to do some introspection. And my first instinct was to be very reactive and redirect my anger and my frustration towards that person, because I was so disappointed and ashamed and humiliated that I wanted them to know how bad I felt. But then I sat down, I thought it through, and I was like, you know what? There's no point in that. That person probably knows that this was a shitty move. They probably know, and it's on them to work it out. It's not on me to make them a better person. I do believe that when there's a will, there's a way, but you also have to be willing to put in the effort to become a better person. I don't know, I feel like there's so much you can do for somebody who wants to change, but it has to come from them. So knowing that that person didn't owe me anything, and I didn't owe them anything either, I just let it die. And yes, I spoke about how it made me feel, but I was not in a angry mode, and I was not like, yelling at that person or anything. I was just stating facts and recognizing my emotions, but not letting them take over. And I'm very proud of that, because I used to be very impulsive and very intense, but now that I'm a little bit more mature, I have a little bit more wisdom, and it helps me to kind of surpass and move on from situations like that. And I'm happy about that. And circling back to the whole self-worth thing, a lot of it comes from now knowing my worth and being able to set boundaries and to have them being respected. Because it's one thing to say, oh, I have these and these values that need to be respected, but it's also another to have them actually be respected and not cross lines that you don't want to cross. And if we would have had that conversation a couple of years ago, it would not have been the case. I would have been a little bit more, maybe too forgiving. And I do like to see the best in people, and maybe call me innocent, but I trust people blindly until proven otherwise. And that's exactly what happened. And I like to give chances, but once I feel betrayed, or once there's a certain line that has been crossed, it's too late. And I used to not think that way. I used to give infinite chances and hopes to get some sort of validation. whether that was a validation that I can be loved, that I can be appreciated, that I can be desired even. But, it comes with a certain level and certain standards. So I'm very proud about myself for how I reacted and how I'm recovering from that situation. And yeah, maybe it sounds a little bit self-absorbed, but honestly, I feel it's just because I know that I've grown a lot and I've come a long way. And I'm happy about that. As I said, I was a little bit hesitant at first about making this week's episode about that, because truthfully, there was a part of me that was kind of afraid that it would kill my chances with that person, or it would ruin it, whatever we had. But it's already ruined. Who am I kidding? That person ruined it for themselves, because let's say I just forgave whatever happened. Let's say I moved on and I was like, okay, you know what? Let's reschedule or whatever, which they didn't do, but that's something else. That's a topic for another time. I would have gone into the next dates with a step back. I would have held back because of that one situation. And this is not good. You should not be going into dates with a feeling of resentment. Almost. This sounds a little bit extreme, but ultimately that's what would have happened. I would have been a little bit better about that one situation. Mind you, it was not our first date. It was not our second date. It was our third date. Anyway, pointless. The point is, these are not good foundations on which to start a relationship, whether it's romantic or simply platonic. I do believe that trust is important and mutual respect. And there would have been a part of me that would have thought the respect isn't mutual because of that one situation. And it is what it is. So I'm here today making this episode about this. I don't know if that person is going to see it or not. If they do, I don't care. That's what happened. And I'm here to talk about my point of view, again, how it made me feel. And as I said, I'm not here to shame anybody. I'm not here to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm just here to relate my perspective and how it made me feel and how the whole introspection that I had to do. And this is what the coffee talks are about. So cheers to that. It's funny because I waited for 2025 to start dating again because, as I mentioned in, I think it was 2 episodes ago, the end of 2024 was very intense and very chaotic. So one, I didn't have the time, but also I think I was not necessarily in a good place mentally to be dating. So I waited for the new year to get back into dating. And then this happened. And I was like, it was a big realization for me. I think it was a rough start, but also I think I needed that. Because now I'm able to get back into dating with intentions that are a little bit clearer, with a point of view that is different. Not entirely, but, I think every experience we go through, every little moment has an impact on the way that we see things, on the way that we think things through. And it was a little bit of a slap in the face, if you ask me, to just get back into dating and this happening. And at first I was like, ugh, here we go again, another disappointment. But ultimately, I think it just helped me to realign my values and to realign my intentions when it comes to dating, and really getting a better understanding of my self-worth and my self-love, and knowing what I want and what I don't want, and being a little bit more rigid when it comes to dating and not letting things like this pass, because that's not okay. And if it's okay for you, it's fine. But what's not okay for me is not okay for me. So I don't know if that makes sense. In my head, it does. You tell me. Anyway, all of this to say that knowing your own worth is important and it's valid, and establishing your boundaries and your limits is also important. And as much as you want to be loved by others, you should also start just by loving yourself and knowing your worth and realizing that, because it can get hard when it's one rejection after another, even though it's not like directly. That was not a direct rejection, but it was a form of rejection in itself. And it's hard to remember your worth, and it's hard to not think that you're worthless in that kind of situation. But this is where your whole self-love comes into play. And this is why I think it's important to practice self-love daily and to remind yourself what's important for you and what's okay for you. What's yeah. I'm getting lost here, but essentially I want you to remember that you are worth it, and you shouldn't let others make you think otherwise. And on that beautiful and cheesy note, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you for watching or listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting me. I truly, 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 truly mean it. Hopefully I have made a little difference in your day today. If you would like to make a difference in mine, you know what to do. And I'm going to wish you in bonne journée.